let's start with correcting a motivation with Refuge and Bodhicitta. So to begin with, let's just create a space in our mind. Taking 2 or 3 deep breaths. Letting our mind calm down. And we're going to count a round of 21 breaths as a way of centering our mind, developing focus, inner focus. Using every breath as an anchor for a mind that becomes more settled. In the beginning of our session, generating a motivation in forms of refuge and bodhicitta, reminding us first of the causes for going for refuge. First being an apprehension from the suffering that we go through in the myriad cycles of cyclic existence. Dying, being born and die, countless times again and again and again. And all experiences of discomfort, pain, fear, anxiety, dissatisfaction that occur to us almost every day of our life. Either on a small scale or on a great scale. But also reminding ourselves of our limitations. Thinking of the people that are close to our heart in this life. And also the bonds, the connections that we have had with so many other living beings since time without beginning and up until now, in different births that we've already been through. We're limited insofar as not being able to do something that will once and for all reduce and eliminate the suffering of others. And we're limited because our mind is completely under the control of ignorance, anger, attachment, jealousy, pride. Because we're still under the control of afflictions and karma. And so to be able to eliminate all of our limitations, obscurations, afflictive emotions, their seeds, their imprints, we're going to rely upon someone that has done it before the Buddha, that has developed full experience. We're going to rely upon the teachings of the Buddha, but even more so on the knowledge of reality that the Buddha developed. And the cessation of everything that obscured his mind. We're also going to rely upon the Sangha, particularly the community of Arya Bodhisattvas, but also the community of teachers that teach us the Dharma, in order for ourselves to become Buddhas in the future, to develop the Dharma in our own mind, for ourselves to become an Arya Sangha with full capacity to help others and ourselves. And so in visualizing the Buddha in front of us, surrounded by Arya Bodhisattvas, we can think, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right. And so in the last 2 or 3 sessions, we had a thorough look at the parts of the 10 non-virtues. And so we looked at that extensively in looking at each and every action, dividing it into, first of all, the preliminary section, which consists of not only identifying the basis of our action, but also what kind of affliction is involved with performing such actions, what kind of motivation, what is the attitude that we develop, what is the type of discrimination that we have. We also looked at the performance, and we also looked at the culmination of the action. And as I said, the whole idea is to look at the path of actions and see how we can either increase the power of our positive actions or reduce the power of our negative actions. And so we have had a thorough look at those 10 parts of actions. And today I wanted to look at some ancillary explanation of different classifications of actions, projecting actions, completing actions, and so forth. And then also to speak of how we then take it on into our daily life, our practice in daily life, accumulate merit, purify negativities and obscurations. And then that will lead us on to speaking of the purification of negative actions using the 4 paths of the antidote. But before we do so, I'm wondering if you have any questions arising from things that we've spoken of before. All right. Just a second. There it is. Okay. So though we spoke about, in general, what makes an action or what influences the heaviness or lightness of an action, Lama Tsongkhapa in his Lamrim Chemo gives a more thorough explanation of how our actions become either very heavy or very light in considering different permutation. I think that it's interesting to look at that because often we think of, for example, the action of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and so forth, and we regard them in general as negative actions, but we can certainly look at actions that become very strong. For example, killing can become very strong, or killing can become very light, which means that the respective result that killing will produce would be different. So let's look at, first of all, the 6 factors that determine the heaviness of our actions. And so Lama Tsongkhapa said, first of all, strong compounding attitude or conditioning. depending on the strength of the three poisons. And so we can perform a negative action, a non-virtuous action, with either a slight irritation, slight anger, or it can be burning anger or hatred. That will obviously influence the heaviness of our action. Also, familiarity plays a role. That's the second one. Commensurate with how deep our familiarity with virtues and non-virtues. The more familiar we are with non-virtues, the stronger the non-virtue will become. And similarly with virtues, we want to habituate the mind with virtues. The more familiar we become, our virtues become heavy, strong, effective, and so forth. Now, looking at the entity, from killing to idle talk, which means the 7 actions of body and speech. So we have killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle talk. They go from the heaviest to the lightest. So idle talk is the lighter. But then when we look at the 3 non-virtues of mind, malice, covetousness, malice, and wrong views, then we go from the lighter to the heavier. So wrong views is regarded as the heavier. Now, the basis of our actions, benefit or harm to, for instance, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, these make our actions become very heavy. One-sided motivation for the discordant class is spending one's entire life in non-virtue without doing even a single virtue. I think that probably that's not our case. In our case, I think that we try as much as we can to put into practice the Dhamma. And so our motivation is not as one-sided motivation, solely invested in non-virtue. And another thing is the elimination of the discordant class, giving up the non-virtue side, becoming free of desire, and training in virtuous action. That obviously makes our virtuous actions become very strong. But I think that kind of the next point is more, you can say, interesting. And so how the causes influence the heaviness of karma, that's from Lama Tsongkhapa's Lama Rinchen, the great exposition on the steps of the path of enlightenment. Lama Tsongkhapa says that, first of all, our attitude in the performance of an actions depends on how strong the afflictions that are involved are. So we spoke about it in the previous part, the strong compounding attitude or conditioning. So similarly, how strong the afflictions are. But also one thing that can make our negative actions become very strong, or also in some sense, we can also say positive actions. So when they're done with delight by oneself, encouraging others to do it and praising it. So when we think about, for example, the action of killing, if we kill with delight, we joy in the heart. If we either do it by ourselves or we encourage others to do it, and we also praise it, we said that that was a great thing. If planning is very detailed over a long time, if we do it constantly and diligently, and we do it, we're doing it cruelly, etc. If we torture, if we abuse others, and we also develop joy in that, that makes the action become very strong. Particularly when we think of a long deliberation with prolonged planning, where we have the ability to allow the motivation factor to remain in our mind for a long time and still refuse to give up negative actions. With prolonged planning, that makes karma become way heavier. Then Lama Tsongkhapa speaks of due to the absence of antidotes. And so we in general, and I refer to we here as the people here, or our fellow Dhamma practitioners, or you can also say practitioners of other traditions in some sense, we develop antidotes, we try to develop antidotes to our afflictive emotions. But when it occurs that the antidote is absent, while not taking precepts daily, for example, we don't make any effort to focus on engendering virtue, while not doing such things as observing one-day vows, and while not occasionally practicing other virtue without shame, without embarrassment, without regret, without having generated realizations, or with still being attached to the worldly. So I think that for us, in some sense, the negative actions that we perform come under these sections due to the absence of the antidote, particularly because we mostly perform negative actions with being attached to the affairs of Allah, of this life, often without shame, embarrassment, or regret. And this is an interesting thing. Shame and embarrassment are considered to be virtuous state of mind. And so the difference between shame and embarrassment, well, actually, let's look at what is common to both of them. So shame and embarrassment are an attitude of, both of them are attitudes of abstention from negative actions. But we either do it on account of ourselves or we do it on account of others. So for example, if you see yourself as Buddhist and you think that this is not suitable for me as Buddhist to behave like that, this is called embarrassment. So it's different to a sense of embarrassment that we have in our worldly affairs. It is a particular type of embarrassment where we shun negative actions because we think that this is not right for me to behave in this way, or we think that, for example, it is not suitable for me to behave in this way because my fellow Dharma practitioners see what I do, my teachers know what I do, the Buddha know what I do. I don't want to make them disheartened, and therefore I need to abstain from negative actions. And so both of these attitudes, shame and embarrassment, are really helpful in shunning negative actions. And so when we lack shame and embarrassment, and also when we lack regret for negative actions that we do, obviously it has a strong effect on the heaviness of karma. Then the following thing that makes karma heavy is due to clinging to the perverse and being involved with wrong views. So particularly when we first of all said that wrong views is the stronger non-virtue of mind. In that when we spoke previously of non-views, we said that non-views here refer to particularly deprecating or denying things such as the effects of our actions. We might hold that it doesn't really matter. Our actions do not matter. They do not produce their respective results. Positive actions do not lead to happiness. Negative actions do not lead to suffering. And therefore, in general, from a Buddhist perspective, that is an attitude that opens the way to much harm. And so due to wrong views, if we think that our actions don't really matter, we cling to the perverse, and that makes karma very heavy. And then finally, due to the basis or object, when the object is bigger, more significant, more important, it makes our karma becomes bigger. And so, for example, or heavier. So, for example, in Tibetan culture, in general, as Tibetans are by and large, you can say Tibetan culture is a meat-eating culture, for example, in that, meat was common on the, was or still is very common in Tibetan diet, and particularly because of the landscape in Tibet. Still, it is considered to be kind of less negative to eat the flesh of a bigger animal than the flesh of a small animal. There's more killing done when small animals are being killed, less killing that is being done when a bigger animal is being killed. So in that sense, you can say that killing of a big animal could be either less negative, but at the same time, it can also be more negative. So there's a contradiction here in that sometimes they say that when big animals are being killed, the suffering that they experience is bigger. Also, when big animals are being killed, with bigger animals, there is maybe more, I guess that cognitive process is can be more elaborate or more sophisticated with the bigger animals. So we have two views here, that killing big animals is more heavier than other killing. Also from another perspective, it could be lighter. Anyway, I think that the point here in looking at that list of factors that determine the heaviness of karma is to understand that when we ask ourselves in general, what is the result of our negative actions, it's hard to conclude it in a very definite way. It could be very heavy, but it could be very light, because there's so many factors that play a role in the heaviness of our actions. And also with this, we can at least try to reduce the efficacy of our negative actions, or vice versa, conversely, to increase the power of our virtuous actions. And so also Nagarjuna says in his letter to a friend, when virtues or non-virtues are done continually, passionately, without antidote, when the object has great virtues or is of primary importance, that makes our actions become very strong. And then Lama Tsongkhapa also says, incidentally, the gates of strong karma. Another factor that makes karma become very strong is, first of all, due to the field, which means due to the recipient of our action. So often when we perform an action, we speak about the agent, it is we ourselves, the recipient of our actions, another person. And so when the recipient of our actions are, for example, the three jewels, gurus, parents, and so forth. The so forth, we can also include those which the impoverished, those the dispossessed, those that find themselves in a certain compromised situation. When we perform a negative actions in relation to them, it becomes very strong. Or if we perform positive actions with respect to our parents, our gurus, the impoverished, the three jewels, it becomes a very strong positive action, virtuous action. But also in relation to ourselves, the person who is acting, great strengths due to the support is while possessing and not possessing vows, and being skilled or unskilled about performing virtue or non-virtue, and being skilled in purifying them, which means that for me, for example, let's say that if I look at the action of killing, or I think that probably you can also think about it in relation to yourself. For those of you who have taken the vow, the refuge vow before, killing while having the vow of my mind stream becomes way more stronger. Lying, divisive speech, what else? Sexual misconduct or what have you, stealing, they become more heavier if we possess a vow in our mind stream. Similarly, an attitude of abstention. If we deliberately abstain from non-virtues and thinking that this is not right for me to do it because I have a vow, it makes the attitude of abstention way stronger. And so often they say with respect to the taking of vows that if you think that, for example, I'm not going to kill ever again, or at least as much as I can, I'm not going to kill, I'm not going to steal, as much as I can, I'm going to be honest with those around me, I'm not going to lie and so forth. But for the time being, I don't feel like taking the vow. I don't want to I don't want to limit my options. Well, it's good to abstain from, definitely it's good to abstain from all those negative actions. But if you possess a vow, the merit that you accumulate because of having the vow, because of meaning to abstain from negative actions, that becomes way stronger. And so actually, before we continue, since I mentioned vows, I think that probably the next module that you guys will study would be the refuge module. And so when we take upon ourselves, when we go for refuge, when we take upon ourselves the refuge vow, we become committed to abstain from one of the 5 things which can be included within the vow. So abstaining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxicants. So the first 4 are considered to be things which are negative by nature, in that anyone that performs those actions performs something that is negative by nature. We consider those actions to be negative in general, whereas intoxicants is not something that is negative by nature, but it opens the way for the performance of other non-virtuous actions, particularly when a mind becomes not discerning, not clear, not focused, a little bit confused. And so for that reason, intoxicants was also included within the list of 5. And so we can take the vow of the refuge vow, which is also called the vow of approaching virtue. And to break it, I think that I've said it, I might have said it before, to break the vow, certain situations need to occur. And so while killing in general is a negative action, to break the vow, we need to basically perform homicide or murder, to kill another person deliberately. So if we think that, for example, I cannot take the refuge vow because I have to call pest control to my house and that would be breaking my vow, well, that's not the right way to look at that. It is, killing other living beings is a negative thing, but it doesn't cause you to break the vow. To break the vow, it needs to be the killing of another human being. Similarly, with stealing, well, stealing needs to be kind of a thing that in general, stealing something that is of value, particularly the one that will brand you as a thief. That's stealing. Sexual misconduct is taken to be mainly infidelity. And so we had a lot of discussion about sexual misconduct, but interestingly, I think that quite maybe in an inspiring way, all the people that I've worked with before said that, well, there are many different things that could come under the banner of sexual misconduct. Really, the one that we are concerned with is the non-virtues of not maintaining loyalty in our relationships. So either cheating on a partner or wanting to have a relationship with someone that is in another recognized relationship. And so whether we are married or not married, whether we have certificate or not have certificate, it doesn't really matter. If we are in a relationship, which is a recognized relationship in society, and we either cheat on our partner or we have a relationship with someone in another recognized relationship, it causes a lot of heartache for other people. And so that's considered to be non-virtuous. Then we have lying, and to break a vow using lying, it needs to be lying about it, something that is big, claiming that we have superhuman qualities. Like, for example, that we have realized emptiness, that we have attained calm abiding, that we have developed bodhicitta and have entered the path. Now, if we firmly believe that this is true, even if we are deluded about it, it's not lying. Lying is wanting to misrepresent reality, to twist reality. That would be what causes us to break the vow. And so we spoke about it in relation to great strength due to support. Also, Lama Tsongkhapa mentions, well, being in possession of bodhicitta or not in possession of it, which means that if we develop bodhicitta or great compassion, it might be that we still need to do a particular place and a particular action. And this is also another interesting point. Often in certain situations, we need to have a certain assessment, assess the prohibition in performing an action versus the necessity of doing it nonetheless. Right. So although in general there's like a blanket rule about not performing negative actions, still there are situations where it is better to do it rather than not do it. And so if we then, in certain situations when we have to do something that in general is prohibited, if a mind is controlled by compassion, by bodhicitta, it reduces the power of the negative action. Then we have great strength due to the thing. I like this word, the thing. Sounds very unprofessional. Anyway, it says, when making offerings, for example, offering the Dhamma is greater than offering material things. But of course, to offer the Dhamma, which means to give Dhamma teachings, we need to possess knowledge of the Dhamma. And so if we do think that in the future I want to share the Dhamma with others, then the first step is to make sure that we study as much as we can. But study alone is not enough. We also need to put it into practice so that we develop some experience of the Dhamma. So offering the Dhamma is considered to be greater than offering material things, because the ability to be of benefit to others long-term becomes greater. And finally, the great strength due to the attitude says that when in possession of the mind of enlightenment, virtues become greater. I think that we can say not only mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, but also great compassion. So whatever we do, motivated by compassion, by the mind of enlightenment, that will become bigger, greater. All right. Any questions before we look at some classifications of karma? Cool. And so the next point that I wanted to draw upon is completing actions versus projecting actions. I'm wondering if you've heard about those classifications before. I guess that many of you have. And so, first of all, projecting actions. Projecting actions, which are also called throwing actions, are those actions that project a future rebirth in samsara. And so often we speak about it in relation to non-virtuous actions. So non-virtuous actions contribute to a miserable rebirth in samsara. And so often we say that killing, for example, motivated by hatred is a cause for being born in a miserable state of existence. Often we speak about the hells in Buddhism. So projecting action in general determines the type of rebirth that we take. Now, completing action is an action that determines the type of experience that we have once we've already taken a rebirth. And so, for example, while in general, being born as a human being is considered to be a good thing, still, you can be a human being and have a horrible life. You can be either very sick for most of your life. You can experience great tragedies. You can have a life that is full of strife and pain and so forth. So while the projecting action was a positive projecting action, being born as a human being, the completing action that plays a role in our life would be a negative or non-virtuous completing action. Or vice versa, when we think of being born in a miserable state of existence, like, for example, as an animal, as a pet, as a dog, but having a great life and being taken care of greatly by your owner, being fed well, being treated with a lot of affection, you can say that this is due to virtues completing karma. And so let's look at this permutation. So according to Geshe Sopa's commentary, this is Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, but also the Treasure of Knowledge, a Hinayana text. One projected result is linked with one projecting karma. So according to those texts, we have a very simplistic or simple presentation of karma where one result is connected with one cause. But then according to the Companion of Knowledge, which is a Mahayana scripture that looks at the topic of karma, one projecting action can project a few rebirths. And so I think that Lama Tsongkhapa, for example, when he speaks about, I think that is in the section of karma, he comes up with those cases which are a little bit anecdotal, I think, or about obscure. So he said that, for example, as far as I remember, he said that there was one nun that called her fellow nun a bitch, and subsequently she was born 500 times as a dog. So be careful. Obviously, it's not for monks. All right. And so let's look at kind of those situations. So those permutations. So virtues completing actions with virtues completing actions could be, for example, being born as a human being and being rich, being healthy, being happy. Everything is kind of hunky-dory. Everything that we do is successful. So we have both virtues completing action and virtues completing karma. But we can have a non-virtuous projecting action that joins together with a virtuous completing action. So, for example, being born as a cherished pet, when you're being cared for, fed well, and so forth. On account of non-virtuous projecting action, we were born as an animal, or certain living being was born as an animal, but being treated well is due to virtues completing actions. Now, virtues projecting action with non-virtues completing action would be, for example, being born as a human being, but having a life that is full of sickness. Whereas non-virtues projecting action with non-virtues completing action, that's kind of the worst of the worst, I guess, being born as a battery chicken or as an animal in the meat industry. That's pretty bad, eh? And so that's one classification of actions: projecting and completing actions. Another classification of actions are actions done versus accumulated. This is a little bit obscure, but there are things that we, for example, there are things that we, there are thoughts that we have, for example, and no, we think sometimes if only I could strangle that person. Obviously, we're not going to do it. If only I could punch that person. So we have a certain intention, but we don't act upon that intention. So we still, you can say we still have a negative kind of a negative intention. We do a certain action, but the action is not accumulated as, for example, the action of killing or abusing others. Still, negative intentions, a negative intention conditions the mind to a certain thing. Or, for example, in our dreams, we might also have certain thoughts, certain ideas. We might behave positively or negatively in our dreams. So obviously, we are not creating real actions. Still, if we have kind of those violent dreams in which our mind is controlled by the intention to harm, it does have a certain effect over the mind, on the mind. And so you can say that this is an action of, this is an example of action done, but not accumulated. In that, for example, if we think of having a ninja fight with many others, like in Kill Bill, the Battle of the 99 in Kill Bill. Obviously, if we just dream about it, and we also rejoice in our dreams in doing that, there's a certain effect that it lives on our mind, but it's not an action that was done in an actual fact, so we haven't accumulated the action of killing. Also, actions done and immediately regretted, or actions done while regretting those actions. So actions done while regretting those actions or having regretted it immediately changes the efficacy of our actions. So when we say that it is action done but not accumulated, it does not mean to say that there is no negative effect that we will experience in relation to that in the future. There will still be a negative result, but not to the same extent that we would have had if we performed kind of this full-fledged course of action. And so often, for example, it is said that I think that many of you might have had the story. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition is full of stories that show a certain moral. Sometimes some people take those stories to be literal, sometimes a wonder. But anyway, one of the stories that you might have had is about someone requesting ordination. So there was an old guy requesting ordination. He went to see Shariputra or Magaliputra. They said that he didn't have any roots of virtue that made him suitable to take ordination. He became really depressed, and he went to see the Buddha. And the Buddha said that actually did have some virtues that made him roots of virtues, that made it possible for him to take ordination because, and this is what the story says, many lifetimes ago, as a fly, it was resting on a piece of dung that was placed on a cart that was going around the stupa. And through that, he was able to place some roots of virtue in his mind that made it suitable for him to take ordination. And so the story comes up quite often. I don't know if such stories can be taken literally or not literally. But anyway, obviously, as a fly resting upon a piece of dung, the fly didn't have any intention to go around the stupa, but still, it is given as an example of something that still helped to create virtue. And so the point is that we have, or like, for example, we say that if we walk around squashing ants or insects under a foot, there's some karma that is being accumulated, although we do not intend to do so. Still considered to be negative karma, although we do not intend to do so. Which means that I think that even though there is no deliberate intention involved in a karma, it does not mean to say that whatever we do does not produce results. To produce the full sets of results, we need to have all the components of actions being present. If we do not intend, even if we are not aware of acting in a particular way, if we are not aware of killing insects and so forth, it might still have a certain effect that we will experience in the future. So you can say that it is action done, but not accumulated, in that it's not a full set of action that has been accumulated. And so Lama Tsongkhapa says, with respect to action done, it says that which you have given thought to, after having considered, you actually carry it out by body or speech. Sorry, that's the Sangha from his yogic level. It means that the thought or carrying it out with one's body and speech is an action done. An action accumulated is all actions with the exception of the 10. What is done in the dream, what is done unknowingly, etc. The results of actions done and accumulated will certainly be experienced. And so just to give some example, action done and accumulated is committing a premeditated murder. Action accumulated but not done is contemplating killing someone for a long time, planning it but not carrying it out. Which means that there's a certain action that is accumulated because of, on account of harboring a negative intent, even though we haven't done the action in an actual sense. Now, action accumulated but not done is killing done in a dream. Not accumulated and not done is generosity motivated by the mind of enlightenment, is an example of killing not done and not accumulated. It's a little bit convoluted, isn't it? And so I think that the intention, the point is, in this classification, is to think that when we develop a positive intention, a virtuous intention, and we act virtuously, intendedly, we can say that at least at that time we do not perform negative actions, we do not accumulate negative actions, and therefore, for us, I guess it's an ideal situation. And so that brings us to then cultivating ethical behavior, which is taking, I think that it is about taking the topic of karma and practicing it on a daily basis. So Lama Tsongkhapa says that having understood, first of all, what constitutes non-virtuous actions, actually we haven't spoke about virtuous actions. And so the presentation of virtuous action is not presented extensively in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chem or other texts that I looked at. Apart from, of course, we do speak a lot about virtuous actions or virtuous practices, love and compassion, the mind of enlightenment, patience, generosity, and so forth. All of these are virtuous action. And in some texts, particularly when we look at the presentation of the six perfection, there is a very extensive presentation of them. But in general, there's no, I haven't encountered a very detailed presentation of the 10 virtues, the parts of virtuous actions. And so we can understand that, first of all, as being the opposite of the parts of the 10 non-virtues. But the 10 virtuous actions are not simply the absence of the 10 non-virtues. Like, for example, the virtuous action of not killing is not simply not killing, because when I go to sleep, for example, or when I'm talking to you now, I do not kill. The not killing needs to be an intentional not killing, right? So when we intend to do it, also with a positive intention, hopefully, but also when we act in ways which are directly contradictory to killing, like, for example, having an intention not to kill, but on top of that, we can also be involved in animal liberation or saving the life of others, protecting the life of others. So it's taking it to the next step. Lying, for example, simply not telling a lie doesn't mean that we perform the virtuous action of not lying. It's deliberately abstaining from lying, and also doing whatever we can in order to be truthful and honest. Again, sometimes we have to look at the situations. There are situations where it's better sometimes to lie rather than disclose the truth. Like, for example, when if you're if you're helping your aging parent, that maybe they got sick with something that is serious, it's going to make them really it's going to make them worried, a lot of pain. In some situation, you might prefer to not to disclose the truth in order to protect someone from pain. And so the 10 parts of virtues need to be motivated by a virtuous intention. So we have not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct. They are quite straightforward. Not lying, no harsh speech, no divisive speech, and abstaining from idle talk. And then we have non-malice, non-covetousness, and non-wrong views. With the opposite of malice, covetousness, and wrong views, we need to deliberately develop positive states of mind. If we develop deliberately those positive states of mind, virtuous state of mind, they will also lead to the 7 virtuous actions of body and speech, abstaining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and so forth. And so after that, Lama Tsongkhapa in his text explains how we cultivate an ethical behavior. And so in general, before we look at ethical behavior, let's look at what the meaning of merit is. So we speak a lot about merit. And so in general, our positive actions contribute to the accumulation of merit. When merit is being explained in general, it is said that merit ensures that whatever we do is going to be accomplished successfully. A person that has accumulated merit is a person that can experience the result of the action successfully and quickly and in a bountiful way. Whereas a person that doesn't have merit might attempt very strongly to perform a certain, to undertake a certain project. They might have all the ingredients in place, but on account of a lack of merit, they will not find success. So it's a very general explanation of merit, don't you find? It's very, very general. It is said that, for example, someone might come up with a very extensive project. The planning process would be very detailed. They'll have all the right ingredients in place. Still, they'll become unsuccessful. They'll be unsuccessful on account of a lack of merit. Whereas someone might have a kind of easy-go-lucky approach, not a lot of pre-planning, not a lot of effort in whatever they do, will experience great success. That's on account of merit. And so that's in general. But more specifically, the things that contribute to the accumulation of merit are the actions, the positive actions that we do. And so merit, you can say, is a result of our virtuous actions, of our positive actions. The more positive actions that we do, the greater the accumulation of merit is. So that's one accumulation. The second accumulation is called the accumulation of wisdom, exalted wisdom. It has to do with particularly developing an insight into emptiness, into reality. And so these two, the accumulation of merit and accumulation of wisdom, are connected with Buddhahood in a final sense. So it is said that when we attain the state of Buddha, we attain, first of all, a consciousness, the mind of Buddha. And so the accumulation of wisdom contributes mainly to the exalted consciousness of Buddha, what we call the Dhammakaya. Whereas the accumulation of merit mainly contributes to the form bodies of Buddha. So the form bodies of Buddha are those different types, you can say, the different manifestations that Buddha takes in order to be of benefit to others. So when we think of Buddha Shakyamuni, for example, being born as a human being, attain the state of enlightenment as a human being, we have bodies of Buddha, which are called Nimanakaya, the emanation body, Sambhogakaya, the utility body. These forms of Buddha mainly attributed to the accumulation of merit. The accumulation of merit is that which is mainly responsible for forming those traces leading to the form bodies of Buddha, those different manifestations of Buddha. So that's the accumulation of merit in general. Now, in order to accumulate that, in order to cultivate an ethical behavior, the general presentation given by Lama Tsongkhapa is to think day and night of karma, becoming familiar with it and becoming convinced. Developing an inference through belief in statements such as, from generosity comes resources, from ethics, happiness, from patience, beauty, from joyous effort, determination, from concentration comes peace. And so this statement is found not only in the sutras, but also in, for example, in Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. In the first session that we had discussing karma, one of the things that I said is that it's hard to develop a strong conviction in karma because we are mainly dealing with a level that is hidden to us. Not only it's hidden in general, but some of the things are extremely hidden. And so to trust that karma does produce its respective effect, we need to develop an inference of belief. Now, an inference or an inferential cognition is a realizing consciousness. To develop a realizing consciousness, which is based on belief, we need to have a wide understanding of the teachings of the Buddha. Not only a wide understanding in general, but also as much as we can to draw upon a personal experience in life and to see how the experiences that we have in our life are reflected in the teachings of the Buddha. So when we work, for example, with our disturbing emotions, and we first of all discover how our disturbing emotions do cause us pain, they are distorted consciousnesses. When we also learn about the description of reality, our reality of death and impermanence, the different sufferings in cyclic existence. When we hear about teachings on emptiness and so forth, we can then think that if all those teachings make sense to us, and there are a lot of things that we can verify either through our senses or through our intellectual understanding, we can keep our mind open to look at the presentation of karma to the point in which we develop what is called a realization of belief. And so in this scriptural citation, it is said, from generosity comes resources. So that refers to, this statement refers to the results of the 6 perfections. So for the perfection of generosity, we experience a life of full of resources. And so, for example, you might find that someone finds success in whatever they do, they encounter resources, whereas you yourself are trying to work hard to accumulate money, wealth, or what have you, and you don't find success. From a Buddhist perspective, we said having practiced generosity before leads to the experience of resources. And so one thing that we bring into our daily life is also to think that if I want to have a better access to resources here and hereafter, I need to be generous. And of course, when we think of wanting to have more resources in this and future life, it's not with a sense of attachment in general. We can think that, first of all, for us, I think, as 21st century Buddhists, but also people that have encountered Buddhism many of us in the latest stage of our life, many of us are kind of middle class up Buddhists. We don't have to struggle very hard in our life. And we have enough time and energy and ability to set some time aside to the practice of Dharma. This is pretty middle class and up. If our day-to-day reality would be a reality of struggling, it is likely that we would have found it way harder to study the Dharma, to practice the Dharma, and so forth. And so we can say that whatever we've done before, I don't know what I've done in my previous life, I must have been generous in one way or another to be able to have the resources that I need in this life to practice the Dhamma, to study the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma. So also, when I think of wanting to create the conditions for that in the future, rather than becoming attached to money and resources and so forth, I can think, I need to have enough to get by. I want to have enough to feel comfortable so that I can use some of my time to the practice of Dhamma. If I have too much, by the way, too much could be harmful. If we have, it is said, for example, being born in the God realms, where there's less suffering, doesn't give one the drive to study the Dhamma. It's very difficult because everything is hunky-dory, everything works fine. So there's no impetus to do something about a situation. So if a situation is too good, it's not that good from a Dhamma perspective. If it's too bad, of course, that's not good. So we want to have things in moderation, so to speak. And so from generosity comes the resources. From ethics, it says happiness. But the type of happiness that we speak about here is what we call happy rebirth, so highest states of rebirth. And so from a Buddhist perspective, we speak about the three realms of existence. So we have the hell realms, pretas, animals, they're called the miserable realms. And then the higher realms, or the happy realms. When I say happy realms, it's probably, maybe a better word for that would be a pleasant or comfortable realms, where there is, relatively to the miserable realms, there is a greater sense of comfort or ease. And so being born as a human being, being born as a god or demigod is considered to be better than being born in the miserable realm. And so the key for that is said to be at the very basis, guarding ethical discipline, which abstains from the 10 non-virtues. So we spoke about the 10 non-virtues to a great extent. And so when we take up the practice of ethical discipline and we abstain from the 10 non-virtues, we are creating causes for being born in a happy state of existence, in a more comfortable state of existence. And so from generosity resources, from ethics, a good state of rebirth, a comfortable state of rebirth. And then it says from patience, beauty. But rather than being kind of beautiful, as so far as kind of being hot, I think that we can consider that to have an appearance of that other people find appealing. So you don't have to be kind of like Miss Universe or Mr. Universe. It's not. That's not the point. It's having a kind of presence that other people find appealing. And so when we think about, for example, when I think about some of my teachers, some of my teachers have this, at least now I can think of one or two that, physically they might not be, beautiful in the sense of what we consider to be conventional beauty, but their presence is radiating and is so attractive and appealing to others, not just to me, but to others. So I think that, at least the way that I think about from patience come beauty or a sense of appeal, I think about it like that. We have this magnificence that other people gravitate towards. So from patience, beauty, from joyous effort, determination. So joyous effort, the perfection of joyous effort is delighting in virtue, becoming enthused about virtue. And so if we become enthused about virtue, obviously we also develop determination. And from conviction, from concentration comes peace, or a peaceful mind. And so that comes through day and night thinking of karma, becoming familiar with it and becoming convinced about the presentation of karma. So becoming convinced, again, I think that for us, it's work in progress. It is likely to be something that is developed over time, from 1 year to the next. There's no way to push it. There's no way to kind of press forward. I think that we just need to give ourselves time and go along. Now, the second point that Lama Tsongkhapa mentions is gaining conviction concerning the Buddha's teachings on karma, because it is impossible for a Buddha to lie. Now, I remember that in my early year of translation here at the center, I used to work with a Geshe that is called Geshe Jamring, a fantastic Geshe. And he used to come up with this argument, and in my mind, I always find a certain sense of resistance to this argument. So it is, he used to say that, well, karma works, and part of the reason that karma works is that it is impossible for a Buddha to lie. So on the surface, I think that it's quite difficult to kind of accept that as a valid argument. I think that the way that I think about it now, with respect to it is impossible for a Buddha to lie, is in terms of the qualities of mind that a Buddha develops. So Buddha attained the mind of the Dharmakaya, or the exalted mind of Buddha, having complete knowledge of everything that exists and its an extent. All phenomena, ultimate truths and conventional truths. But also, a Buddha's mind is imbued with utmost love, compassion, bodhicitta, knowledge, love, and ability, basically. And so, while in certain situations, I think that you can say that a Buddha teaches in a way that accords with the dispositions of disciples, and certain statements are not to be taken as the final teachings of the Buddha, they're subject to interpretation. Still, I think that considering the qualities of love, knowledge, and ability, it is impossible for a Buddha to lie for their own sake. A Buddha will never do that in order to gain a personal profit. And so Lama Tsongkhapa says here, with respect to gaining conviction concerning the Buddha's teachings on karma. So in our daily life, when we think of, for example, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and so forth, now when we, in a certain situation, we think that, it's so difficult to avoid a negative action. It's so difficult to avoid being truthful. It's so difficult to avoid killing. So I wonder whether it is true that killing is a negative action, whether it is true that stealing is a negative action. Of course, I mean, when I present it like that, when I say it like that, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but I think that in certain ways we try to, sometimes we try to bend reality in order to fit our desire or wish to do something that in general is negative. So then we think that it is impossible for a Buddha to create a fabrication for us. So the teachings on karma, as the Buddha taught, are true, because a Buddha will not have a negative intention deliberately lying to us about karma. So that's the second point that we bring into our intention in cultivating ethical behavior. Now, the third one is meditating on emptiness is helpful for gaining certainty with respect to karma. And so I think that you'll have a separate module on emptiness, but we can speak about it at least here for a few minutes. And so emptiness, the meaning of emptiness is, emptiness can be explained in a variety of ways, but in general, we say that emptiness is the absence of independent existence, of objective existence. And so often, whatever we currently see, either with our senses, a sense consciousness, or a sense consciousness, or mental consciousness, comes with an appearance of objective existence, as if things exist in the object itself, not in the mind that sees that, but in the object itself. And so emptiness is a negation of objective existence. Currently, we have a certain appearance that done to our mind as things existing objectively, and we take it on, take it up, and try to assess whether things exist in the way that they appear to our mind, whether they exist objectively from the on-side, in the object, in that sense, inherently, independently, truly. And so when we look for that thing that supposedly exists in and of itself, independently, at the end of our analysis and investigation, we find that it doesn't exist in this way. It is empty of existing in a way that it appears. That's in general what the meaning of emptiness is. And so it is said that for those who develop an understanding of emptiness, everything makes sense. For those who don't have at all an understanding of emptiness, nothing makes sense. And so for those who develop an understanding of emptiness, everything makes sense, particularly the presentation of karma makes a great sense from the perspective of emptiness. You know, when we think of the logical process that we use in order to come to ascertain, to determine emptiness, one of the reasons that we use is the reasoning of dependent origination. And dependent origination has different levels. The first level is the level of causality. Causes and conditions come together to produce their own respective results. The result doesn't exist in and of itself. It's not that the result comes to be on its own accord. It comes to be in dependence upon cause and conditions. A subset of cause and conditions is karma. So we have outer causality. So a seed gives rise to a flower. And the inner causality, the actions that we take, produce happiness or suffering for us. And when I say happiness or suffering, it's not just the sensation of happiness or suffering. We also have other levels of suffering or happiness that the Buddha describes. So, for example, we have suffering of change or pervasive suffering of conditionality. Pervasive suffering of conditionality, for example, is this body. This is an example of pervasive suffering of conditionality. So this body is not suffering in the sense that it's not a sensation of pain. But from the very establishment of this body, it is guaranteed that I will go through situations which I do not want. Because of this body, I will go through suffering of sickness, aging, and death, not finding what I'm looking for, having to be separated again and again from things that cause me pleasure, and having to encounter again and again the things that cause me displeasure. It is, you can say, built in within this body. But also because of this body, I perform actions that compound this suffering in future lifetimes. And therefore, from a Buddhist perspective, this body is called a body in the nature of suffering. It is a body of suffering. It's not a sensation, but it's suffering, which means that it's not satisfactory, it's not good enough. And so when we think of the inner working of causality, karma, from positive actions come happiness or good states of rebirth. From negative actions comes suffering. Not only suffering and pain, but also being born with a body and mind that compound the suffering in this and future lifetimes. And so we think about it in relation to dependent origination. So karma makes sense, more sense, when we think about it in terms of cause and conditions produce results. But also on a deeper level, that those results do not exist from the on-side. There's not even a fraction of objectivity in those results. And so this is also something that we take into our daily practice when we think of karma. And so, for example, when we think about it in terms of mind training practice, right? So I think that it was Shantideva who said in his Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, he spoke about how we, in the sixth chapter, the chapter of patience, he spoke about how to willingly accept suffering. You can willingly accept suffering, also reminding you at the time in which you experience suffering, pain, something unfortunate happens, you feel that you have been wronged by someone and you didn't do anything to deserve it and so forth. You can think that this is a result of actions that you have done before. You do not encounter the results of actions you have not done. And actions done do not go to waste. You can also think about it as something that doesn't exist objectively. It's not that from the side of the abuser, the harmer, or the action itself, you've been harmed, but it works as a dependent arising. Actions done before produce the respective effect. And so when we think about it, when we experience suffering, problems, and so forth, when other people cause us harm, when they wrong us, when they create problems or difficulties to us, we become angry. We resent them. But when we think about it in relation to ourselves, when we think that, well, I mean, to be honest, I've created the conditions for that experience, we don't become resentful of ourselves, do we? We don't hate ourselves. We do not become angry with ourselves. And so learning how to accept responsibility from the point of view of karma, it does not mean to say that others are not taking actions that cause us pain or suffering. Of course, others also act as conditions for the pain that we experience. Others do act as conditions, but causes were also created by ourselves. If we haven't created causes for suffering, it is impossible for us to experience the result of suffering. And so the next point that Lama Tsongkhapa mentions is, without thinking of karma in order to gain certainty, mere knowledge of it is not that useful, right? So it's not useful for us to just cite facts and figures about karma, just to have kind of mere knowledge of it. We need to think of karma again and again in order to gain certainty. And the more certain we become of karma, the more it influences or affects our life. Then the next point is cultivating a mind of restraint without even allowing one's motivation to move towards misdeeds. I think that we are quite far off from not allowing our motivation to move towards misdeeds, but over time that will happen, or at least an immediate reaction in which we will recognize a certain negative action for being negative action. We'll know that immediate reaction will arise the more we become familiar with karma. And lastly, thinking that whatever happens, it is a result of karma. I think that I mentioned that a few minutes ago. And so next, Lama Tsongkhapa's and also other texts speak of purifying negativities using the 4 powers, and we will speak about it in our next session. But what I wanted to do now is to look at the next section, which is the causes for incurring negativities or downfalls. And so we spoke a lot about the way that we perform negative actions, the different parts of negative actions. The reason that we perform them from the very outset begins with, first of all, not knowing the distinction between virtues and non-virtues, and not knowing what is included in one's vows. And so, first of all, if we don't have a good understanding of the presentation of karma, it'd be very difficult to avoid negative actions and to cultivate virtuous behavior. Of course, we can do it on a very, you can say, basic level. I wouldn't call it superficial level. We'll have a basic ability to do it, but without being really knowledgeable about karma, our ability would be limited. But also, even more so, if we don't have any idea about what's included within the vows that we take upon ourselves, it'd be almost impossible to make sure that we guard our vows properly. And so, for example, I remember that in my first few years of being Buddhist, I've attended empowerments. I was living in India. His Holiness used to teach in India more often. And so you receive an empowerment. It comes with the Bodhisattva vow. I've taken the Bodhisattva vow a few times, had no idea what I need to do in order to guard the vow. Not knowing what I need to do in order to guard the vow, obviously, is a gateway for breaking the vow. And also, I see here in, having lived here for so many years, that when an empowerment is being given, an initiation is being given, people rush and flock to take empowerments that come at least with a Bodhisattva vow, and sometimes also with a tantric vow. But not many people take the time to discover what they need to do in order to guard the vow. So if we have no idea what to do in relation to our vows, we'll break them, most certainly. And so that's the first gateway. So what it means is that when we take upon ourselves the vow, at least we need to know kind of what the basics what the basic rules are. So let's look at the different classes of vows that we have. We have the first level of vows is called the vows of personal liberation, the pratimoksha level. Right? Pratimoksha is a word in Sanskrit. There are different levels of vows included within that. So we have vows of ordination, being ordained as novice or fully ordained, but also the lay vow is also included within that. That's the first level of vows. With vows of ordination, you're not really supposed to study the fine prints of the ordination vow before you take ordination. So basically, you buy something without knowing what it is. I mean, obviously, we know what the general goal is, right? So we know that, when you take ordination, then it's game over for family life. It's also game over for alcohol and so forth. But you're not really supposed to study a commentary to the ordination vow before you become ordained. But with the lay vow, you can certainly know what you need to abstain from when you take the vow. So that's good to come prepared to know exactly what you need to abstain from if you need to take the vow in the future. With the Bodhisattva vow, you can also take the vow. You can also study what you need to abstain from when you take the Bodhisattva vow. So you have the 18 root downfalls, the 46 secondary offenses. You can certainly study them beforehand, and also to assess for yourself whether you're capable in guarding the vow. With a tantric vow, you cannot study the vow before you take the vow, and therefore, if you are going to take a Hatha Yoga Tantra empowerment that comes with the tantric vow, then you need to be fully committed to study the vow after you take the empowerment and to do whatever you can in order to guard it. And so, not knowing the distinction between virtues and non-virtues, and not knowing what is included in one's vows is the first gateway for incurring in negativity or downfall. Now, the second one is, even if you know that you need to guard what you need to guard in relation to the vows that you have, not fully trusting karma and thereby disregarding the precepts is another gateway for incurring faults, for incurring misdeeds. Sometimes we think that, yeah, I know that killing is a negative action, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, in this case, I'm just going to let it pass. So having that sense of this kind of disregard to karma or disregard to the precepts is another gate of incurring a downfall or negativity. By the way, downfall is always in relation to the vows. And so, for example, you're taking the Bodhisattva vow. Or let's put the Bodhisattva vow aside. Let's say the ordination vow or the lay vow. One of the things that you're committing is to not kill a human being deliberately. If you kill another human being deliberately, then you incur a negativity, something that is negative by nature, but on top of that, a downfall in relation to the vow. So kind of two for the price of one. If you don't have the vow, you don't incur a downfall, but certainly you incur a negativity. So the third gate for incurring negativities is due to a lack of conscientiousness. Now, conscientiousness is a mental factor, which in general, it is, you can say, doing the right thing. It is conscientiousness is invested in virtue. It is invested in joyous effort, which means delighting in virtue. It is in abstention from the 10 non-virtues and so forth. So it's doing the right thing in general. So if we don't have conscientiousness, it is possible that we will incur negativities or downfalls. And of course, leading from that is due to a lack of mindfulness and alertness, which I think that this is something that for us it occurs every day, but many times during the day, that we lack mindfulness and alertness. We are not aware that currently a negative state of mind has arisen. we're not aware of it. We're not aware of it. We are, or even if we are aware of it, we haven't stopped it at the right time. So when we think of, for example, anger, if we'd be able to recognize anger as soon as it arises, we might be able to do something about it, either to reduce the power of our anger or to completely put the lid of anger on anger. If we let anger dwell in our mind for a few minutes, it will gain momentum. And so often we are not mindful of the presence of afflictive states of mind. Oh, we tell ourselves a certain story. I'm not really angry. I'm just doing what is right. I'm not really attached. I'm just kind of doing what is right. It's good for me. It's good for others. I'm not really attached. And so on account of mindfulness and alertness, we perform negative actions. Then finally, an abundance of the afflictions is another gateway for behaving in a negative way or creating a downfall. And so one thing that we can also be honest about is that currently we have no choice. Now, of course, on paper, we want to avoid negative karma. We want to abstain from negativities. Definitely all of us want to do it. We have no ability to do it perfectly at the present because the mind is still afflicted. So even if our intention is good, inevitably we will be having a negative way, one way or another. So we also, in some situations, we can also cut ourselves some slack, in a sense that kind of rather than thinking that it doesn't really matter, we don't need to calm down on ourselves too heavily. My mind is afflicted, so I will continue to be having in a negative way, but over time, I want to reduce that, and I have the ability to reduce my negative tendencies. If I calm down on myself too heavily, it is likely that at the end, I will decide that it's too hard for me, and I will just decide to kind of give up the whole attempt. And I've encountered it over the years. I've encountered it a few times here, at Generousness Institute and in other places where people become too strict with themselves. When they have unrealistic expectations from themselves to behave in a way that is wholly positive and never negative, they basically dig their own graves. It is impossible for us to be wholly positive. We're not there yet. And so we need to kind of make sure that we are balancing our expectations with respect to ourselves, but at the same time also strive higher, better, and deeper. Right. I'm wondering if you have any questions or anything that you wanted to bring up. What a cute dog, eh?
Let me get it right.
All right.
Where is it? Oh. He was born a dog, but he's definitely spoiled. What's that? I forget. I can't.
So that's a non-virtuous projecting karma, but a virtuous completing karma.
A virtuous completing karma. I got two of them here.
There you go. Yeah. Cool. All right. So I think that maybe we'll leave it here for today. I'm going to go back to bed now. Hey, Nitya.
I hope you get well soon.